Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for being here. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my journey in becoming an assistant psychologist in a forensic setting and just how I firstly obtained that role, but also I'm going to be sharing with you why I decided not to continue going into forensic psychology. And we literally just came away from that after my assistant psychologist post. Just to begin, I'm going to take you through exactly how I got to the assistant psychologist position in forensics. So the forensic unit that I was working in was an inpatient hospital for male offenders. They also had a female offenders unit which was about maybe 10-15 miles away from that service, but it was very much in the location that I was living in. So I had access to two different sites as an assistant psychologist, which was a very rare thing, I think, in assistant psychology, that I was able to transfer between two sites, which means I got a lot of experience. I was very, very lucky. Prior to that, so let's start from the beginning. So when I first started, I'm just gonna get comfortable and cross my legs. So let's start from the beginning, shall we? So after I finished my university undergraduate degree, I went straight into domiciliary and home care services. So what that meant was I would have to do mobility, personal care, meals, hygiene, end-of-life care. It was a variety of things for people that were immobile and also for people that were quite elderly. So it was very much like going into their homes as a care worker, driving around to different locations and helping with a co-facilitator or a co-healthcare worker to do some of these things. You know, this taught me a lot about respect and dignity, and I think a lot of people come to me, and this really kind of is a bit annoying, I'm not gonna lie, but they say, I really don't want to kind of like do personal care. And I'm sorry if I'm mocking people when I'm saying that, but I think I can be pretty real here on YouTube when I say that we started from the bottom. You've got to start from the bottom. And you have to be able to understand what dignity and respect feels like when you're in a position where you cannot always make your own choices, and what it feels like for other people to have to do certain things around hygiene, personal care, things like that. I'm not saying you have to do these roles. I'm just saying that these are the kinds of roles that teach you a lot about people who are in the severest of struggles. And this teaches you a lot about intersectionality and inclusion, and how that's really important because some people can come from very different backgrounds to yourself. I guess it's quite a broad topic to cover when it comes to talking about, you know, different backgrounds and intersectionality, so maybe I'll do a video on that specifically and separately. But yeah, I guess it's really important to do these kinds of roles because it teaches you a lot about people from different backgrounds. That doesn't mean you have to do this role to get, you know, a PWP role or to get onto the clinical psychologist role, but it teaches you a lot about life and what people go through. And when people kind of neglect these areas of care, it has huge implications, and it creates more of a divide between the people that are helping versus the people that need the help. It makes psychology feel like it's an elitist profession, and it's about being a practitioner who can come to the same level, who can be at the same level as the patients, to be able to help them in the way that's going to serve them best. So I would definitely think about these kinds of roles, especially just to kind of help people. You know, a lot of people are involved in charity and stuff like that. This is another area which you can be involved in, not to have to do personal care for people, but just to understand what, you know, doing things with dignity and respect for others is like. So yeah, I was a domiciliary and home care for about 6 months, and then I ended up getting promoted into a supervisor for that domiciliary and home care company. So I ended up working in the actual office with other supervisors, and I was actually sending carers out and recruiting carers to actually go and do the work that I had been doing, to make sure that they were appropriate, they had the right attitude, and that they would be able to offer the support that was necessary for the patients that they were going to work with. So once I was doing that job, I very quickly realised that supervisory roles, especially within domiciliary and home care, was not for me. And so I very quickly ended that job and started to look for other kind of healthcare worker roles, more support worker based roles with mental health difficulties in kind of younger adults and people that were of a different nature to what I had worked with before. So I then went into forensics, and I ended up getting a job as a healthcare worker working with offenders that were male to begin with. And it was a really kind of difficult experience to start off with, because this was never something that I had experienced before. It was completely new to me, and everything was under lock and key. So this was like, whoa, like, what's going on here? And I remember my first day, we entered a ward where there were patients around, and I think like just people having belts with pouches and alarms and things like that gives you a sense, like, it puts you on edge. So I won't lie, I was put on edge, and I really didn't need to be. It was a low secure ward, and the patients were, you know, I worked there for nearly 2 years or a year and a half before I got promoted to assistant psychologist position, and they were the nicest people. They were, you know, they had their difficulties, as do anyone, but they, you know, they were good patients. And so in that position, on my first day I was taken for an introductory tour around the hospital, and I got to my ward, and then the guy that was introducing me to the ward left me in like the corridor area of a house that I had no idea like who was coming or going or anything. And there was a office that had a secure lock on it, so you could lock it from the inside and then nobody could get in. And he literally just went in there, he locked the door, and I was just like, what am I meant to do here? And I don't know if that was a bit of a joke on his side, because he wanted to know how freaked out I would get. But I remember like patients coming up to me and talking to me, and I was just like, oh my god, we're under lock and key. What am I like, you know, what kinds of things do I need to be aware of? And I think that was a very unfair for that person to do. But equally, you know, now looking back at it, it's kind of like funny, because I'm just like, yeah, I was a lot more freaked out than I needed to be at that time. So that is what happened. And then, you know, I ended up being on the ward doing the healthcare duties that I needed to. So my duties included like escorting patients out, taking them on group activities, taking them out and about, doing activities with them if they were cooking, cleaning their bedrooms, helping them with kind of like psychology programs. So a lot of the times they had programs that they had to do that the psychologist had set for them, and they would have to do them in their own time unless they were having to do them with the actual psychologist. And so sometimes as a healthcare worker you would also be a key worker for certain patients, and you would help them with certain programs and help them to stick to their routines and medication and things like that. So that was one of the things that I did. And in doing that, I really kind of enjoyed the program process of like taking them through sort of like guided materials. And that's when I was like, oh, what's all this about? Like, how can I get more involved in this? And it was very much my own initiative, where I was like, okay, how do I get into the psychology department to do more of this? Because this is the degree that I've done, and this is what I want more experience in. And very quickly I realized the competitiveness that was already kind of like vibing in the secure kind of hospital that I was working in. There were lots of people that were students and that were MSc students and that were looking to kind of become clinical psychologists and wanting that kind of psychology experience. So I was like, okay, I don't have an MSc, I've got this experience, I've kind of just started like 6 months ago, what can I do to get as much experience? So this is what really helped me to stand out. So what I did was I made sure that everybody in the building knew, everybody in the hospital knew who I was. Not just staff members, but also patients, because the way that patients talk about you gets circulated very quickly. If you're helpful, if you're somebody who constantly tells them they can't have something or constantly puts unreasonable demands on them in terms of what they're allowed to do and what they're not. Like, a lot of this happens sometimes in you know, services, and you do see it very quickly when you go in and see, you know, who's appropriate, who's not, and that's a whole different topic. But they talk about you. They talk about you to each other. They talk about you to their staff, to their key workers, and to seniors, like to their psychiatrists when they're going into psychiatrist meetings. They'll have their meetings and they'll talk to their psychiatrist about who's been helping them, who's been supporting them. All of these things get spoken about. And so all this information circulates, you know, when you're in a hospital, all this information circulates. So I was like, okay, I need to get known, because not a lot of people know me here. So they're not going to encourage me to work in a psychology department if nobody knows me. So this is when I started working on my work ethic. So I got a job in the same hospital as a receptionist, and I got a job in the same hospital as a bank worker, which meant, so firstly, the receptionist meant that I was able to handle any queries, families, visitors, like anybody that was coming into the building, and just really acknowledging who was coming in and making them aware. So the first time, as soon as they would walk into the hospital, they would see my face, which meant that they would become aware of who I was, what I'm about. Even if it's just as a receptionist, at the end of the day, it's about how you approach people. If you say your name, if you give them a warm welcome, you know, it can work wonders. So that is what I did as a kind of a part-time job on the side of doing the normal kind of healthcare worker job. So the great thing about healthcare workers is, well, what I find was that you do shift work. So you do like long hours, 20 hours to 12 hours in the day, or about, no, is it more than, I think it's not 12 hours, maybe like 10 hours in the day. And then you have like 3 days on, 2 days off, 3 days on, 2 days off. So sometimes you would work weekends and sometimes you wouldn't. So that meant that the days that I don't work, I could pick up extra shifts as a receptionist, and so this is what I did. And the reason why I did this is because every single psychiatrist, every single psychologist, every single senior manager or clinical lead or anyone would walk through those front doors, would walk past the reception to get to their offices, which meant that they would see me, that I would be able to say hello, that I would be able to introduce myself and just ask them about their day and get really kind of networky with them. And that's what I did. And so everybody began to know who I was and become more and more aware of what I was about. And I remember having a conversation, actually this was after the bank, so let's talk about the bank. So the next thing that I did was obviously get a bank role, which meant that, so we all have like a designated, as a healthcare worker, you have a designated work ward or work area. And so in my designated ward, I would know all the processes. You know, I would help people out who are there on an ad hoc basis or as a bank member of staff. And so I did the same thing as a bank member, is I would go onto other wards, not really knowing everything, and I'd have to follow the processes of some of the other people, some of the other healthcare workers that were already established on the ward. But what that meant is I was becoming more and more aware of the different kind of complexities on the different wards. So I was getting more than one area of experience, but I was also becoming more and more aware of the kind of patients that I could be supporting. And again, they're talking more about you, they're intrigued. Every time a new person comes on the ward, they're like, who's that? They want to come and talk to you. So, you know, you have conversations with them that are helpful, appropriate, all of that. And then you're, again, getting really kind of aware of the nurse in charge, the psychologist for the ward, because every ward has a different psychologist. So you then become more and more aware of these senior members of staff, and again, you get to connect with them even more so. And you use the initiative of saying, you know, if there's anything that I can do to help with the psychological intervention or this or that, you have to use your initiative to put that forward and communicate that with them, so that they're able to give you some responsibility. They're able to ask you and see you as someone that wants to help and someone that's keen. And so that's more and more of an advantage for you, because they're not just going to see you and say, oh yeah, we want you in the psychology department. It never works like that. And it's never been that you have just kind of like got a job a month before and then got an assistant psychologist post. Like it just doesn't work like that. Like communication, networking, presence, work ethic, all of that is something that's circulated around at certain hospitals, especially in services that are quite tight-knit and have different range of patients and clients and complexities. Like all of this information travels and people get to know people very quickly, and reputation builds very quickly too. So this is really important to consider when you're thinking about getting into a psychology department, that it's not like, oh, I've been here for a month, now I can go and go into the psychology department. No, it's about building those kind of relationships beforehand by taking on additional duties and asking for additional responsibilities, so then they can see you as a person that could join their team, that could actually deliver these interventions without much supervision, and that could take on a role where less supervision is required. So this is something that I did, was when I was going on to the wards as a bank, and when I was a receptionist, patients would see me and they'd be like, oh, you're here as well, or you're here as well. And staff would see me as well and be like, you're here as well, you're here as well. And I remember the service lead, once I was walking with her towards the reception, and she was like, oh, what are you doing here? It's your day off. And I was like, oh, I'm a receptionist. She commented on my work ethic, and she said, you've got a great work ethic because you're trying to take every opportunity that you possibly can. And so that's exactly what I did, was I tried to grab every single opportunity and make it my own. And this is essentially what got me more and more well known. And so when it came to, I was doing this for about 6 months, so I would have done a healthcare worker post for about a year. And then I heard about an assistant psychologist post come up in the female unit, so I went to do an interview there, but I didn't get it. I knew I wasn't going to get it, but I went for the purpose of a practice. That's what I went for. I just wanted to know what the questions are like, so then when it happens in an area where I actually want to drive to every day and establish myself more so, I know that I'll be able to then achieve that in that actual interview. So a lot of this isn't about kind of just rushing into everything. I had a process. I was working towards everything slowly, step by step, to really gain the experience and the knowledge necessary to be able to ace that interview, that promotion when it was coming up. And so that promotion was coming up slowly. And obviously, because I had built really good relationships, my ward manager was the first one to come and tell me, it's coming up, what are you going to do about it? And at first I was just like, I don't really know, I'm not really sure. And then he was really pushing me for it. And then in the end he was like, why don't you shadow one of the psychologists? And I was like, I didn't even know that was an option. So that is what I asked to do. I was like, hey guys, this is a really great promotion that's coming up, but I really want to make sure it's the right role for me and that I can do it to support you guys. So would it be okay if I shadowed a psychologist doing what would be expected of a assistant psychologist? I guess it was a role that psychologists were already doing, but they knew that an assistant psych could do it. So I ended up doing that, and it worked well. I was able to shadow, I was able to just follow and just like watch what the process was that they were doing when they were escorting patients and things like that, and report back and write clinical entries and reports and things like that. And all of that gave me the experience that I needed to know exactly what models the psychologists were using, to understand what kind of, I guess, ways of communication they were using with the patients, how they were approaching certain tasks, how they were doing certain things. And this was something that I used when it came to the interview. So when it came to the interview, I knew that I was going in fully prepared because I knew what processes they were using, I knew what interventions in theory they were following, I knew that they were using certain materials that were specific to the certain intervention that they were using. So I was very much clued up when I went, because I did all of the back end work. And I think a lot of people, again, when they're going into forensic or clinical or anything, it's very much like, yeah, I've got everything, I've got the experience, when actually have you tried to put yourself in that position that you really want? Have you tried to get close to it? Have you tried to even do 10% of it? And so it's really important to think about these things when you're applying for these kinds of roles, because this is what's going to get you to put your best foot forward when it actually comes to the real thing. You're going in prepared. So that is what I did. And I was up against people that had masters, multiple masters. I was up against people who had multiple degrees. I was against people that had multiple experience in mental health, but I ended up getting the job because I did the back end work that I needed to. So this isn't about me not being experienced enough. This is about me being smart about how I could approach that particular interview and how I could approach that promotion. So this is all the stuff that led up to that. So that is what kind of got me into the assistant psychologist position. I really enjoyed it. I did it for a year, and then my secondment, because it was a secondment position, came to an end. And then I went back onto the wards of the healthcare worker while I figured out what I was going to do next. And then it came an opportunity to say, okay, well, we don't need you at the male secure unit as an assistant psych, but would you like to come onto the female unit as an assistant psych? And so that's what I did. So I ended up working there, doing similar kinds of things, but slightly different because it was a female ward and their difficulties were slightly different. Their complexities were slightly different. But again, that gave me so much more experience, and I was very good at being on good terms with the manager, because I think a lot of the times people can be like saying, the manager's like this, the manager's like that, you know, they're horrible, they're this, they're that. And I think it's just about understanding that professional relationships are not like personal relationships. Niceness is obviously a given. You have to be nice to each other. But what you feel makes sense in your head does not make sense as a senior, because they've got more of a perspective on certain things and they have more of an idea of what's going on. So sometimes we can have difficult relationships with our seniors, but it's really important to understand that you only have one perspective. You don't understand the full picture the way that a senior would, because they would have more information about certain things than you would, because that's what they're privy to, because they're in that position. So, I mean, I'm not going to talk much about what went on in the offices and things like that, but I felt like I was able to hold a really good professional relationship with my seniors, and so I was given more and more opportunities. And then when I came back, when I finished my female placement, I was able to come back and do more with the males as well. And so I was getting, again, 2 different types of experiences. So this is something that really added to my personal statement. So after I had done about 6 months of doing backwards and forwards between the male and female secure units, I was then able to apply for a new role. And at that point I was like, do I want to go into forensic psychology? Do I want to go into becoming a clinical psychologist? Like, I was so unsure, and what I was seeing around me was that everybody was just rushing. They were just rushing to get onto training and roles which you know, were already competitive, and competitiveness is going to be everywhere. You know, whatever field you go into, it's always there. But there was just always this constant rush to make their careers happen, and I was just like, actually, I don't want to get into something if I'm not going to enjoy it. A career isn't just for the next 5 years after you've done the training, it's for the rest of your life. So I really wanted to make sure that I was setting up the foundations in a way where I could have as many opportunities for my future, as opposed to just kind of going into one route and hoping for the best with that route. That does work for some people, but it didn't work for me. So that's when I did a bit of research, and that's when I came across the trainee PWP role, and that felt very nice to me because it was an area that I'd never worked in. So it was public health, well, I had worked in it as a domiciliary and residential care assistant, but it wasn't something that I hadn't worked in the NHS centre or anything like that, and so IAPT was very different to that. So I was like, this is great, this is something that's completely new, and this would give me more experience. So this would give me a new experience to think about whether this is something that I want to do. So that's exactly what I went into, was then working on my applications for my trainee interviews, and you know, I've done a video on that about how that went, and yeah, I ended up getting the role at you know, Surrey, and then yeah, that's what I went into. So what I want to talk about is why I didn't choose to go into forensic, because I could. So it wasn't just that I wanted to broaden my ideas around my career, but the other reason why I didn't choose to go into forensics was because of the limitations I feel like it had to my personal life. Now, this is from my own perspective. I could be wrong in a lot of the things that I say, but I just want to share with you my perspective on why I didn't go ahead with it. So one of the things that I really love, and one of the things that I absolutely, this is the only regret that I have in life, is that I didn't start YouTube sooner. And the reason why I didn't start YouTube was because I was too worried about patients finding me on YouTube. And so in certain sessions, certain social sessions, they do have access to social media and YouTube and X and Y and Z. And so they might be able to stream certain things and watch certain things. So I was like, well, if I put myself on YouTube, they're going to be able to find me. They're going to be able to look at perhaps my location if they're really savvy. And they might be able to know, you know, where I'm doing these videos from, or like if I want to share personal things like makeup or other things, then parts of my personal life, which I know personal views about life and things like that, you know, that a lot of people share that, and I loved watching that. And I was like, this is something that I can't do if I work in forensics, because there are people that may kind of I guess it's more thinking about how risk and safety and things like that, especially when you're working with offenders and people that have very severe risky behaviours. It's just kind of thinking about how you don't want to put yourself in that position. And this isn't a personal thing. This was also something that was kind of like, I guess, given to us in our training. Was they gave us specific training on social media and how to hide your social media from the public so that only friends and family could find you. And there were like certain, I think I remember in the training there were certain kind of guidances. Obviously they can't tell you what to do, they're just giving you guidance, but there was certain guidance on like not having a profile picture and not having like your actual name on your Facebook, and just like hiding everything about your personal life, like your children or your family or whatever. This was something that was very much like this was information that was given to us when we were in those settings and as training from the actual service, that just be careful about how much information you put out there. And then I was just thinking to myself that YouTube is something that I really want to do and I really want to get involved in like fully. And and I think the idea of having a career in forensics, constantly being around offenders and in like prison settings and secure settings, really kind of, I guess, hindered my opportunities to really do a YouTube or a social media style kind of job on the side or as a passion or whatever. I just really worried about not being able to have those two things together and in my life. So this is something that really stopped me from taking a role in forensic psychology. And I think like I said, I might be wrong. I think there's lots of different factors that could be like explained more and elaborated on further in being like, this isn't something that you should be scared of, because actually everybody's entitled to living the life that they want to. But again, like I think like when you're people are very kind of secretive about their personal lives as well. Like when you're in healthcare, people don't always share surnames and things like that because they're worried that people might Google, like patients might Google them before they have a session with them or something like that, or after, like they might look at them and their social media and stuff like that. So I guess there's always that boundary, but we live in such an era now where social media is everywhere and it's hard to escape it. I have a friend that doesn't have any kind of social media. She checks in on my Instagram a lot because it's a public platform. But again, like, if I worked in forensics, I would probably have to have a private platform. I'd probably have to have a private Instagram, a private YouTube, and all of this, and it would just make it very hard for me to reach the people that I want to be able to make a difference to the people's lives that I want to. And I feel like I did that as much as I possibly could in forensics, and now I'm in a place where I can do that more with like people in the public. So that was one of the things that really kind of took me away from a life in forensic psychology. The other thing that really kind of impacted me in terms of forensic psychology is once you do a forensic psychology degree, once you do a forensic psychology doctorate, that's the only area that you can actually practice in. A clinical psychologist can practice in lots of different areas of psychology: forensics, educational, industrial, sales psychology even, and obviously normal clinical psychology, but they have more of a variety in terms of like what they can do with their profession. Whereas when you're a forensic psychologist, you can't work across different fields in psychology, it's just forensics. So that already put a limitation. I mean, I think there's so many people out there that are super passionate about forensics, and that's why they go for it, and it's amazing for them. But for me, I didn't want to be an expert just in one field. I wanted to have like a toe in different kinds of areas of psychology. So that's why I was like, this isn't for me, because this would mean that I'd have to just continue with one area of psychology. So I think that's another reason why I didn't choose to go into forensic psychology. And then I guess the other reason is mainly around, I guess, the attitudes that I was open to. Again, at that time it was very competitive, like everybody wanted to become a psychologist. So any kind of psychology like doctorate at that time, when I came out of my assistant psychologist role, was just so unappealing to me. I was like, yeah, I've got the perfect role, assistant psychologist over two different kinds of patient groups and different genders and things like that. Like, this is amazing. But I was just like, I like personally for me, it was important to listen to what I wanted, important for me to explore further rather than just go ahead with a career that everybody else was telling me that I had to go with. And some people got angry at me, like they were like, she's in an assistant psychologist role and now she's not even doing anything with it. Like, people got angry at me, and I know that you know, that people are entitled to their feelings, but at the end of the day it's my choice, and I was very fortunate and I did as much as I can. Like, I used those roles to bring as much support and help to the staff members that I was working with and the patients. I think a lot of people could vouch for that. But at the end of it, you know, when it was time for me to move on, it just wasn't right for me to take on a forensic doctorate or a clinical doctorate at that time, especially if I wanted my life, my future, to be more than just a 9 to 5, to be more than just waking up every morning, having to go to a service, do a 9 to 5, then go home. I wanted more from my life than that. So that's why I didn't end up taking any kind of like forensic or doctorate route. Or any kind of doctorate route, because I just wanted more of a variety in my life and I just wanted to be able to explore further. So yeah, I think I've shared a lot in this video already. I don't know if it's the kind of video that you were hoping for. I guess if you've got any more questions about forensic psychology and why I decided not to go into it that you feel I haven't covered in this video, then just leave your comment below and I will try to answer it as soon as possible. But I hope that you found this video helpful in any way. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care. Bye.